So, during this presentation, I'll be telling you all about the life of F. Scott Fitzgerald and why I think he is an important figure in American history. I just finished reading the book, The Far Side of Paradise, a biography of F. Scott Fitzgerald by Arthur Meisner. This biography gave a great deal of information and details on the upbringing of and the life that Fitzgerald lived, and showed a great sense of why he was the way he was and why he did the things that he did before he died at the age of 44. Before I get into it with Fitzgerald, I wanted to give a little bit of background information. So I'm going to tell you about the Jazz Age, which is when most of his life took place. So the Jazz Age took place in the 1920s and 30s, while jazz music and several different dance styles became popular in the United States. It also took place during the Prohibition era, when alcohol was banned constitutionally from 1920 to 33. Flapper girls, like the one shown in the picture here, were very popular during the Jazz Age. They wore shorter skirts, bobbed their hair, listened and danced to jazz music frequently. Okay, so a little bit of early life here for Fitzgerald. He was born Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald on September 24th, 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was the distant cousin and also named after Francis Scott Key. And if you don't know who that is, he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. His family moved around a lot, and he attended several different schools when he was young. And then at the age of 13, he began writing for his school newspaper at Newman Prep School in New Jersey, which is where they were living at the time. And this is what really began his love for writing. After graduation, Fitzgerald went to Princeton, where he pursued literature, and again he wrote for school newspapers. Princeton at the time was an undergraduate college and much different than it is today. He seemed to only focus on his literary studies along with his social clubs and sports teams rather than his other academics, which put him into an academic probation for most of his time at Princeton. Back home in St. Paul, he was known to people as the handsome young man that was making a living at Princeton. This is because he was he was well known, back in his hometown and also at Princeton. He was writing in papers, he was on sports teams in several clubs, drama clubs, writing clubs, you name it. While he was back home visiting over a Christmas break, he met and fell in love with Ginevra King, who was a beautiful, wealthy socialite from Chicago. She was the inspiration to many characters in his stories. Some that you might be familiar with are Isabel in This Side of Paradise and also Daisy in The Great Gatsby. And then in quotes here I have, "To the end of his days he thought of Ginevra could bring tears to his eyes, and when 20 years after they had parted he saw her again in Hollywood, he very nearly fell in love all over again with that imagined figure." He was just swept away with her. Obviously they didn't end up together. Ginevra ended up not answering his letters. She ended up getting engaged to another guy. And it just kind of went downhill, especially with his academic probation he was in. That really stressed him out. Eventually Fitzgerald dropped out of Princeton and he joined the Army in the fall of 1917. He was paranoid by the thoughts of his literary dreams ending due to joining the Army, and then while stationed in Montgomery, Alabama, he met his future wife Zelda Thayer, who is pictured here. Zelda's parents did not like Fitzgerald at all, and then when the war ended, he moved to New York City and proposed to Zelda against her parents' wishes. Shortly after she called off the engagement, she didn't think that he could financially support the two of them. This led Fitzgerald to turn to alcohol, and he got a job as a car repairman to save up some money. He was working on his novel, This Side of Paradise, and it did get published. And 1 week before it published, Fitzgerald and Zelda got back together. the book became a huge hit. It was super popular, and it brought in a lot of money for them. Their life was crazy. They got married. Their daughter Scotty was born in 1921. They lived a wild life. They partied all the time, drank all the time, would go to these insane, if you've ever seen The Great Gatsby, those are the type of parties that they were going to. And to the point where they were getting kicked out of these parties because they were so wild. They were super well known during this time period because his novel brought him so much fame. They started spending more money than they were earning, so he began writing short stories and selling them to earn more money. They moved to Paris in 1924 with many other writers. These writers were known as the Lost Generation. Fitzgerald became great friends with Ernest Hemingway. They were best friends. They really confided in each other a lot, and while he was in Paris, he continued writing. This is actually where he wrote The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby didn't really get the fame that he had hoped for, and this hit them into some serious debt. It blows my mind that The Great Gatsby didn't get the kind of fame that he thought it would, because it's so popular today. It's one of the most read books in the United States today, so it's just crazy to think about. Now that they were in crippling debt, Fitzgerald turned back to alcoholism. Zelda was having mental breakdowns. She couldn't recover from them. She was admitted to several hospitals. And then in April of 1936, Fitzgerald admitted Zelda into Highland Hospital, which was in North Carolina. And this is where she was supposed to stay for the rest of her life due to her mental state, according to Fitzgerald. He ended up dying in 1940 at the age of 44. He was super young. He was living in Hollywood at the time, trying to get a career in the film business, actually. Zelda died in a fire at Highland Hospital in 1948. A lot of people say she was sedated at the time of her death, and if she wouldn't have been sedated at the time, that she probably would have survived. Why we should remember him. He should be remembered for the legacy of hope that he left on the world. He was extremely talented, even though he struggled with many things in his lifetime. He was always hoping for more. I think that's like the biggest message that he puts out there. Like, he was always just so hopeful. He became successful at a very young age, and he continued to be successful until his death. And I just think he's just an example of the Jazz Age. When I think of the Jazz Age, I think of Great Gatsby, and I think of F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I just think he's a really important figure in American history. Here's my works cited, and that's all. Thank you.